Hi everyone, this is John Sneisner from the Economic Truth Report, and today we have a great honor to have on a guy that I know for a very long time. I've been involved with him. Actually, he's been sitting on the board at Freedom Force International with Ed Griffin, and it's none other than the great Russel Gray, which is a person that hasn't gotten the honor that he really deserves over time, but now really like he's really everybody's tapping into him now, like George Gammon and you've had your real estate guys since 1997, I think it is, Russ, is that correct?
Yeah, Robert Helms started the show with another co-host actually in
Yeah.
1997, and I heard him broadcasting in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2001. Ended up going to one of his seminars, and I had this idea that people needed more than just a seminar; they needed a mentoring program, and so I introduced to him this concept of an investor mentoring club, and we started that up in 2002. Had been doing that for a couple of years. 2004, the original co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show resigned, and I stepped into that spot, and I've been in it ever since. Along the way, we've done a lot of seminars and a lot of coaching. We got very involved in helping people raise private capital on a personal crusade to defund Wall Street. I talk about Main Street, investing in Main Street. And of course, to be a good investor, especially a manager of other people's capital, whether you're managing Main Street assets or paper assets, at the end of the day, you better understand what's going on up at the macroverse. Otherwise, as I found out the hard way in 2008, all that macroverse stuff rolls right downhill and just steamrolls Main Street if you're not paying attention.
Yeah, 100% it is. And your work has been fantastic. I've seen you a lot lately actually on YouTube, so it's pretty exciting to see that you're out there. You've been so involved in the investment world in the United States for a very long time. Like you've been involved in the New Orleans Investment Conference for a very long time. I know that. I think you've been at Freedom Fest as well. Like, yeah, I think you've been there. So you're kind of like one of those guys that have been in the background, very great resource that we've had, and now I kind of start to see you in the forefront. So it's very exciting, that you really getting what you deserve with all the knowledge and everything that you have. I'm very humble to be able to have known you for a while now, and just the amount of knowledge that you have just blows me away usually. So very excited to have you on, Russ. So thanks for coming on.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm not sure I want what I deserve, but I can tell you, I just can see what's going on in the world right now. I've got 6 children and 14 grandchildren, and I don't think I'm done in that department. I'm done in the children department, but in the grandchildren department. And so I'm really starting to think a lot more like a founding father. I'm thinking about generations to come. And I'm just concerned because I think that, if you study economic history, and I know you do, and I didn't until 2008. And in the wake of that, I realized that my ignorance of financial history really prevented me from seeing what were obvious, clear warning signs of major structural imbalances and problems coming. And if you don't study history, you don't see that stuff coming. And so I can tell now, based on history, that we're approaching the end game of the current system. Now, it may go on for another year, may go on for another 5 years, it may go on for another 10 years. I don't know. But in its overall life cycle, it's very near the end. And the odds are very strong in my lifetime, and certainly in my children's lifetime, that we're going to get the Great Reset. And it's
Yeah.
not the first and only Great Reset, although it's been branded that by Klaus Schwab. But it's going to be one in a series of resets that we've had over the years as the economic and geopolitical world evolves. The problem is what is it going to reset into? The whole build back better, the whole tear it down so we can create a new and better system, a new world order. I know you
Yeah.
follow all that stuff. And I'm of the belief that the people who are trying to drive that agenda at the high levels really aren't thinking about the best interest of the Main Street folks that are out there trying to raise a family, bang out a living, just get ahead and be able to retire and enjoy a decent life. And so when that's my belief, then I look around and say, well, what can I do to help? And I think getting involved in educating people is why I love what
Yeah.
you're doing, even though I know your show's just starting out. Happy, happy, happy to be here. In fact, I'd encourage anybody out there that thinks they have something to say that could even enlighten a handful of people, then pick up a microphone and start putting your content out there. because you never know. That's all we did. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden we ended up with 20 million downloads later. I mean, so many people have heard my voice and heard our thoughts, and we've been able to have an impact, not a huge impact. We're not, like some of these really big guys, but, everybody has a role to play in this information war, in trying to get people to wake up and realize that
Yeah.
not everything we see is as it's purported to be, and nobody is looking out for you. If you're not looking out for you, or you're doing it in ignorance, the odds of something bad happening to you, like it did to me in 2008, are probably pretty high.
Yeah.
And so I don't want anybody out there to be ignorant. So I'm pretty committed to the idea of getting good ideas out there and giving people things to think about. And then you got to do your own homework.
Yeah, no, it's very important. Like education is key, and Robert Kiyosaki, he woke me up in 2008. So similar to when you woke up, you were a business owner, real estate investor at the time. I was just a uh like trying to figure out what to do with my life. I was 21, no, let's see, 2000, 24 years old. So just starting out in life and trying to figure out things. And I got basically cold washed by Robert. With my background being from Norway and being brought up in a basically socialist. Like a lot of people say, like, oh, that's not socialism in Norway, no, in Scandinavia. But it's actually, if you look at Sweden and Norway is very different. Sweden has like a lot of successful corporations because they didn't have a straw in the ground, sucking it out and sitting on the welfare dole like a lot of Norwegians did, right? So you see like a huge difference between Norway and Sweden, which is pretty interesting. As well. But being in Norway, in Norway there's a unwritten law, and it's called Jantelov, and it's basically the main statement of that is you should never try to be better than anybody else. And that is so opposite of what I learned with the American culture, and that you want to have success and you want to be as good as you can in life. And so really, like, it really changed my life, like that moment in 2008, and it really brought me down a line of thinking and doing research into a lot of things. And now, we've been looking at this since really since 2013 is when I really deeply started to research all this stuff. So it's been exciting, and it's really good to, we had back, I've been involved with a couple other projects where we were really we were interviewing guys like Robert. We interviewed you a few times as well, and we had great success. We were probably number three in media on YouTube in Canada. And so they just hated us, all the mainstream media outlets in Canada, because we're really waking a lot of people up. And you still see the remnants of that. You still see a lot of people that have started their own little podcast that come from that era. And so it's humbling to see that, what you've done is sowing some seeds of, rebellion in Canada. And it's exciting. It's we're in such a stage of the monetary system now. Like where we are at right now is kind of the latter stage of the monetary cycle, where you've hit kind of peak debt in a lot. I call it peak debt in a lot of different avenues. We've had it in commercial real estate. We have it in real estate in most places. We have it in credit cards and auto loans and student loans. So it's really like people are slowly starting to tap out, and there's nothing really more to suck out of the economy. But then the makers out there, they have a heavy immigration trying to come into Canada. Like they're saying it's for different purposes, but actually one of them is because the worst nightmare of a central banker or banker is that you will not have a new supply of people coming in and getting debtors, buying either real estate or other do that assets, like getting into credit card debt and so on. Because if they can't create more debt, the system just falls apart right away. Like if you stop creating debt right now and we just have the system, you will slowly start to decline, because the monetary system is based basically in this very, very simplest term, is that you have $100, I lend it to you, but I want interest on it. Where are you going to get the interest from? That's the only 100 in existence. Well, you got to create it by another loan. And so there's never enough to pay all the money out off. So unless you have that new supply that comes in, and when you have the banks, where you see now where the banks are starting to, close the spigot of debt, because interest rates, the price of borrowing currency from banks have gone up. So now you're seeing a lot of tremors that are starting to start to take place in the economy. They've been hiding a lot because of COVID. They were able to do moratoriums. They were just restarting student loan payments in the United States. So the government has kind of hidden a lot of the crisis. And even here in Canada, like what they've done now, let me explain this. So for example, in Ottawa, no, in Toronto and the big cities where it's like wild real estate prices, they are now starting to just amortize the loans to 30, 60, and I heard as high as 80. So we're back to like the 80s in Japan, where they had their deflation crisis, where they just had to, in order for the banks not to go completely bust, they had to just be like, hey, here's a 60-year mortgage. You know, you're 50 years old. We're going to put you on a 60-year amortization because you can't afford a mortgage. It's like you'll be 110, you know, when the mortgage is over, if you even are alive at the point. So we're hitting that point in the cycle, as you said, where we're at the end part of the monetary cycle right now. So let's go into a little bit what you're seeing, what's happening in the United States. You follow real estate very closely. Maybe we should talk. Maybe you could tell me what is the most important that you see right now, and then we can kind of talk. I want to mention talk a little bit about commercial real estate in a little bit, but if you can go into the kind of 2, 3 points that are really important for people to understand what's happening in the United States right now.
When I think when you look at, excuse me, when you look at the system, you look at the economy, you look at this environment that we all operate in, the economic environment, there's three major components. There's going to be actually four, what I consider. You have capital, which is the creation of real wealth. You've got the money, which is some vehicle by which you're going to store that productivity until you're ready to spend it. And presumably when you go to do that, it has the same value as when you stored it relative to other things. That's why we like gold, right? If you know, the old adage is, or gold and silver. I just explained it to people this way. If I took a 1964 American quarter, which was made of silver, and put it in a shoebox and pulled it out 50 years later, in 1964, when I put it in the shoebox, it would buy a gallon of gas. And 50 years later, when I pulled it out of the shoebox, it would still buy a gallon of gas, not for the 25-cent face value, but for the value of the metal, because that's what money does. When in our country, we separated the money from the currency, and then we took the currency value of that money out, we replaced it with zinc plated copper. With 6 cents of metal value in it. And so the purchasing power is 25 cents relative to a gallon of gas. It lost, 90% of its value. And so you got to have money. What allows money to circulate is currency, and money can operate as currency, but it operates in a system just like electric current without wires and all of the infrastructure can't flow. And so that's the banking system, the credit system. And so they're all derivatives. So there's capital, which is real wealth. And so you have to measure how productive is a country in ways that matter, right? You can't measure it in terms of numbers. You got to measure it in terms of how many widgets did you create? How many gallons did you produce? How many barrels or bales of hay or food, or, how much pounds of beef, whatever it is. What did you actually produce? I mean, that's real wealth. So you got to pay attention to that. And then you have to understand that everything in the system is credit based. All the pricing is denominated from how much available credit there is in the system. And to your point, it's all credit. And so you got to pay attention to the credit markets. And if you understand a basic premise, the way the system works is that when you have purchased a debt instrument like a bond where somebody owes you money, or a mortgage and they owe you money, and it's throwing off a yield or a coupon. So for example, I buy $100,000 bond at a 5% coupon, it's going to throw off $5,000 a year of interest. Okay, that's math. Well, if all of a sudden the environment that you're in raises interest rates to 10%, that coupon is still only going to be 5,000, which means if you're going to purchase that bond in the secondary market, you're going to pay half in order to get the same yield, right? If I want $5,000 to equal 10% of my investment, I'm only going to bid $50,000. So if you understand that basic concept, it's true in real estate. When cap rates fall, prices go up. And when cap rates rise, which is like the coupon on a piece of real estate, prices fall and equity goes away. And so that's why when you see the Fed aggressively raising interest rates, which, because dollar is the world's reserve currency of the world, and the debt that everybody uses as collateral in all the financial systems are primarily US treasuries, the impact on all the balance sheets loaded up with all of that debt is impacted to where equity falls apart. That's where you see a bank like Silicon Valley Bank a year ago sitting on all of this long-term bonds, and all of a sudden the interest rates go from 25 basis points up to 525 basis points. That percentage of increase, it just collapsed their bond values. They collapsed, their equity disappeared. And then when the street got word of it, and there was a run on the bank. So to answer your question, I pay a lot of attention to the impact or the signs of stress in the financial system on corporate and especially institutional balance sheets. And when you see people tapping into the bank term funding program, when you see a lot of activity in the repo market, when you can tell that people don't, there's not enough liquidity in the system, and the Fed is forced into a situation where either I continue to constrain liquidity to try to bring inflation down, or I unleash liquidity to try to save the financial system. They're in a tough spot. And if your bet is like mine, that they're probably going to sacrifice the currency to save the system, then you need to invest accordingly, right? You need to be prepared for that. And when that means a loss of purchasing power, that means persistent inflation, that means more credit into the system.
Yeah.
The problem is you can only expand credit based on the productivity. And every time you add credit into the system, you're putting a burden on the productivity. And if you combine that with a financial of the financialization of an economy or the globe, we were talking about this before you hit the record button,
Yeah.
then you realize that as you continue to expand credit and currency against a shrinking amount of real productivity, you're going to create scarcity and high prices. And this is what you always see in socialist and communistic
Yeah.
countries. That's the end game. And so when you put so much burden on people, they can't take it anymore. Now you have if you're the authorities, if you're the government, now you got a real problem. Now you've got a revolt. And there's a little bit of that going on all around the world. Right now, it's only political, mostly. Right. But you got people pushing back. You got farmers pushing back
Yeah.
in wherever it is.
All over Europe is, yeah, it's
You've got
France,
this.
it's Belgium, yeah, everywhere.
Yeah. And the United States is able to extend it a little bit longer than everybody else because we
Mhm.
have some unique advantages. But even those advantages don't hold up forever against this type of dilution of real wealth. At some point, people who are starving get upset, and that's happening.
Yeah, no, if you go back to the programs that you were talking about there, that there's multiple programs that are still like they've been ongoing since COVID. For example, the Main Street Lending Program, which is a basically the bailout of people that are struggling, and well, that's why they call it Main Street. You had mutual fund lending, like they basically had a LLC. So what they do when a crisis hits, they create a LLC, special purpose vehicle, and what they do is they load it up with bad assets that are coming in to get it off. Like that's what happened with Greece in 2000, in the 2000s, when they got into the European Union. Goldman Sachs helped them with setting up a corporation on the outside, offloading all their bad assets to it, and then they look good. Then they joined the European Union.
John, those are tumors.
Yeah.
It's really, if you think about what cancer is in the body, you have growth that's out of
Yeah.
control. And then your body is trying to contain that growth. It's got to put those toxic cells somewhere.
Yeah.
And so they create a special purpose vehicle called a tumor,
Yeah.
and they stuff all those cancerous cells in there, hoping to contain it. Debt is a cancer
Yeah.
in the organization or in the organism of an economy. And those types of things you're talking about are really tumors.
Yeah.
And you take them offline, but just like in your body with cancer, if you don't deal with what's causing the cancer,
Yeah.
you can cut the tumor out, and that's fine. And
Yeah.
you mitigate the risk that those particular cancer cells don't infect the system, but your body is still in there creating more cancer cells. So you
Yeah.
really have to deal with the cause of the problem. And that's where I think at some point your body can only handle or only hide so much of the disease. And then the disease overwhelms the health and eats the productivity down to where
Yeah.
you start losing weight. And the analogy of cancer to what's going on in a creditized system, so appropriate. It's, if you
Yeah.
really think about it, it just lines up so well. And that's exactly what's going on. Our world is dying from economic cancer.
Yeah, and the cancer is really what's called financialization. This is my thought of it, where you just make money or currency with currency, as Mike Maloney would say. You just don't use it on those productive things that we just talked about. having a productive, good real estate, or having investing in a business that actually can create value for the consumers and all that. So when you don't do that, when you just go and financialize, like I just interviewed a guy, he was used to run a growth fund at Fidelity, and he's just telling me we're just in the financialized world. So you don't need like the stock market. The reason why it goes up is because they have these high frequency traders. They're not looking for fundamentals no more. They're just looking to chase what's called momentum. So if you hear something, actually, he told me very good. What happened is like they load up on debt, a corporation, and then they say, "Oh, we're gonna look at AI," and then they load up on all this debt. They're looking for doing something in AI. They haven't done anything yet, but suddenly their stock price just skyrockets because somebody started, oh, well, they're going to get into AI. Okay, so they're starting to buy, and then suddenly they have money, but they didn't have money before. They didn't create anything of value before. They actually borrow money and then like created a narrative of trying to prop up their stock price to then actually be able to do something with that money. So they used it's a financialization scheme where they're not really pushing it into productive stuff. I interviewed a lady that's a former derivatives journalist on Wall Street, and she was telling me there with derivatives, basically how it works is that they load into the derivatives. It's good, pretty okay at the start, and then as they create these derivatives, they got to find more assets. So they just go down the asset food chain, to lower and lower and lower and lower assets, and at the end of it, you just get a full-fledged collapse. And so it's that financialization. I don't know if you agree or not, but I think that financialization, just creating currency with currency without creating any productive things into the economy, that is really the tumor.
Yeah.
No, the root cause of the tumors.
Well, I go back to
Yeah,
what I was saying before. If you really understand what an economy is at its fundamental level, it's you have needs
yeah,
and you want them met. And so you go to work to meet other people's needs and do an exchange. I'll meet your needs if you meet mine. That's how society is
yeah,
organized. You grow food, I raise livestock. So I want your vegetables and you want my meat, and we do an exchange. And when
yeah,
that gets big enough, you need a medium of exchange and you need a place to store the value of your productivity until you're ready to spend it for the fruit of somebody else's labor, so to speak. That's the basic premise of an economy, but it's all rooted at the core of production.
yeah,
There can't be consumption without production. Just think about it. If you
yeah,
get up in the morning and you're hungry and you're living on a desert island, then you're going to have to go fish or hunt or harvest if you want to eat. There's no free lunch. You're going to have to work to eat. That's just the way the world is. And so if you're eating without working, you're eating the consumption of somebody else's labor. And so even when you talked about in a financialized economy where these traders are creating derivatives and then trading, trying to find other assets to back up their bets, because it's all based on debt with collateral. And this is, what you have to understand the way it works. If I want, it's like want to buy real estate, I got to pledge the property as
yeah,
collateral. And the other part of the collateral is my future productivity. You're either going to get my payment, which is a piece of my future productivity, or you're going to get the property. And that's the value proposition with a mortgage. And so whatever it is, when you go into the financial system, you got to post collateral. The challenge is that what people consider to be collateral aren't real assets like
oh, yeah,
somebody's income or a physical property, but they're a derivative itself.
yeah,
And so if you
exactly.
understand that real work is the only capital, well, you hear people talk about money and currency as capital. It's not, it's a derivative of capital. Capital is production. Money is a derivative of capital. Currency is a derivative of money, and credit is a derivative of currency. And we're all running around dealing in credit. We're 4 steps removed from anything that's real. So let me just bring it back down to
Yeah,
earth, because I know sometimes I have these conversations with Main Street folks and they're like, Russ, my head is spinning. I don't get it. Just imagine right now you're sitting at your kitchen table and your refrigerator is empty and you and your family are there and you have a stack of money and you're trading between each other and you're trading claims on a sandwich or a glass of milk or whatever. You're trading those claims and you're trading them, you're trading them, you're trading them, and you end up with a big stack. And you go to the refrigerator and there's nothing in the refrigerator because nobody actually went to the grocery store. Nobody actually did any real work. So even though you got rich because you have a lot of claims on wealth, unless somebody actually created something real, to make your claim redeemable for something you can actually use, all you have are numbers. And that's the difference between a nominal economy, which is just based on numbers and claims on wealth, and then a industrial economy that's actually producing real wealth. And what happens is the more people who get into the financial boat, or more people laying claim to the remaining productivity of the people in the economy who are actually working. That was my comment earlier. And as the people who are actually working, producing real goods and services go down, you look at a jobs report and you see a bunch of people who aren't really producing anything, but they're producing derivatives of something, and nobody's actually making anything or growing anything or mining anything. There's just not that much activity going on. Then you got to import all that stuff from the other people who are. You have to say, well, what am I trading?
Yeah.
I'm trading in the United States case, we're trading our ability to print dollars, as many as we want, and dilute the productivity of the rest of the world who trades in our dollars. Well, guess what? The rest of the world's woke up. They figured it out, and they're
Yeah.
aggressively coordinating their efforts to de-dollarize and get out of that system. What Americans don't realize, or anybody that is seriously invested in dollars, denominated in dollars, earning dollars, borrowing dollars, owed dollars, pricing everything in dollars, is that if these people are successful, like the way the BRICS is expanding and some of the other things I'm sure you're following, if they're successful at some point down the road, the amount of productivity that the dollar claims are going to be diluted against is going to go from global productivity down to just American productivity,
Yeah.
which means that the price in dollar terms is going to go way up because you have a
Hmm.
lot of dollars bidding on very little productivity. So to fix it, I think we need to get serious about becoming a productive economy again.
Yeah.
I think all the world needs to get serious about becoming a productive economy. And ultimately, we got to get out of a system that's debt based and get back to using real money. And that's just a hard transition. There's no easy way to go from where we are to where we
No.
need to go. And I think there's going to be a small percentage of people that understand what's happening and are prepared to go through that transition and are willing to forgo a lot of bubble wealth along the way. You might be sitting out of the biggest stock market. But remember, you talked about Venezuela, I think, either during the interview or prior. But there was a point in time where Venezuela had the highest performing number one nominal growth stock market. Their stock market was
Oh,
to the moon. The
yeah,
problem is
exactly.
it was because their currency was failing, and so the dollar or the bolivar value of of their stock market in the real world, in terms of actually being able to spend the proceeds of your stock portfolio and go buy anything, not worth much at all. And,
No,
and so
it didn't really like when you get those blow off tops like that with inflation, like you have it in Turkey right now, you have it in Argentina, same things with the stock market just skyrocketing. But it doesn't mean that you're actually getting anything of value. It just means that the currency is losing tremendous amounts of value. And you might have, if there's something of productivity left in that stock market, you might get a little bit of gain, but it's minimal. Like you don't really see it. Like it's very deceiving, when you see, for example, real estate prices in Toronto are sitting at like, $2 million for a rinky-dink home. Things like that doesn't make sense. It people think that they're super wealthy, and the scariest thing, Russ, is that when you look at the portfolios of what people have for their life savings, for example, a lot of the middle class, they're actually loaded up, and they believe that the value of their home is going to be a portion of that retirement that they're going to have. Here in Canada, it's literally ATM galore in your in the real estate. As soon as you get a little bit of equity, everybody just spends it, and they don't do it what guys like Ken McElroy or like Rob Kiyosaki like actually take that equity out and then invest it into something else. No, they just spend it on fun stuff. That's up there, or as Robert likes to call them, do that. So it's pretty scary to see those sentences, and then you have the biggest portion of the people that have the most wealth, which is the baby boomer generation. They are retired, and they have to actually sell off their portfolio to be able to feed themselves. And so you get like it's interesting now. Like you have several pressures where you have a deflationary pressure, which is one generation, getting downsizing and then getting rid of their assets to then be able to spend it to feed themselves. And then on the other side, you got the inflation, which governments are wild right now. Like they're spending like drunken sailors still. We're out of COVID and they're still running, deficits in the United States. I think it was 2 trillion last year. Here in Canada, they were running like 50, 60. And the debt itself that they racked up has skyrocketed. Uh, I don't know if you've seen the chart, but it
Oh
was
yeah,
like three,
they've
four
all
hundred.
hockey stick.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
exponential. The amount of debt and the debt service, and the cancer. When you hit what I call the event horizon, or the death spiral, is when you get to the point, and you know this in your personal life, if you get to the point where you're borrowing money in order to pay the interest on the money you've already borrowed, boy, that magnifies exponentially. And that's where you start to see these charts hockey stick. But if you knew that you were going to default, like say, for example, you had a credit card with $100,000 limit and you knew that you were going to go bankrupt, what do? You go run that sucker up to the limit and get as much
yeah,
stuff as you can. And I think, it could be, we're seeing some of that. But coming back to Main Street, I think it's an important point. You mentioned Kenny and Robert. What I think that people don't understand that they need to understand is that equity, whether it's in your stock market portfolio and you're looking at your brokerage account or it's in your home, those are unrealized capital gains based on currency and credit expansion.
yeah,
And it's not spendable. The only way you can get it is to either sell the asset or to refinance and cash out the asset. And so you mentioned people doing that. But the problem is there's not enough currency in the system for everybody to do that. So the price isn't really real. It might be real for you. And so what's important to understand is what is wealth, what is investing, and how do you insulate yourself? And it's boring. It's not sexy. Everybody wants the 10 bagger. Everybody wants to buy low, sell high. But if you really think about it, and I'll just give you an example. Let's say you've got a person who's got a $5 million property, no mortgage, and they have no passive income. Okay. So the assets minus liabilities equal net worth. Their net worth is $5 million
yeah,
unrealized. Okay. You got somebody else with a $3 million property with a $2 million mortgage, and they have cash flow on that property of $50,000 a year. Okay. Asset minus liabilities, their net worth is $1 million. But in the real world, they have $50,000 a year to spend.
yeah,
So the person with the $5 million net worth can't pay the electric bill. And the person with the $1 million net worth can pay the electric bill and go to the movies and buy groceries.
yeah.
Right? Who's richer?
No, exactly. No, 100% is. Yeah,
This is nominal confusion. And the thing is, if the property value that they have, that $50,000 a year income, that $3 million property goes to 8 million, or if it went down to 1 million, as long as that 50,000 keeps coming in, doesn't matter. Okay, it's boring. I get it. It's a lot more fun to be in a property that goes from 3 to 5, but unless you cash it out, it's not real. And when you cash it out, if all you do is consume it, it's not sustainable.
yeah,
So to your point, if you're going to play the game and build equity, and I'm a big fan of equity, wrote a book called Equity Habits because that's the inverse of inflation, is when you own assets that are going up because of expanding credit and currency, then you can win, but you've got to convert it into productivity, which is cash flow. So I can loan it to people, and now you're going to go to work and do real work and pay me a percentage of your income. That's real. And then if you don't, I get whatever asset back that, if I'm, say, lending on a mortgage. If I rent you my property, I'm either going to get your rent or I'm going to get use of the property back and rent it to somebody else. But you're going to go to work every day, pay me 20 to 30% of your income for the right to use my property. That's real wealth. Right. If I invested in a productive farm, if I buy an oil well, if I
yeah,
buy something that's real, that's producing, and I get to continually put that produce into the marketplace at whatever the going rate is, I'm protected from inflation because my produce is always going to have relative value. Doesn't matter what the price of the house is. If it sleeps 3 people, whatever 3 people are willing to pay, which is usually about 25% of their income to have a roof over their head, that belongs to me. It's the only way to make it. And so the difference between Kenny and me in 2008 is I was all equity all the time. And I thought somewhere down the road, I will go and invest for income right now, equity. So I was speculating in real estate. It was a huge mistake. Kenny was very focused on creating equity as a derivative of cash flow. Buy a property that cash flows, increase the cash flow, and then that increases the equity, and
Well,
then
yeah.
use the increased cash flow to harvest the increased equity and repeat the process. That's a formula for success. It's so simple, it's easy to miss because it's boring. But if you let it compound over time, it can create, Kenny's got $3 billion of assets,
Yeah.
right? That's how that happened. It just compounds over time. You're on the right end of the hockey stick instead of the wrong end of it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if you can position yourself, like cash flow is so important that most people really forget. And especially in a real estate based economy like Canada is, I think like when I wrote a book on the Canadian economy back in 2016, at that point, I think it was like 20, I calculated about 20 to 25 percent of the economic activity comes from real estate itself. Like any real estate, if people buy it or they build it or whatever happens. So Canada is super reliant on real estate, prices going up all the time. But now they're starting to really face the wall. Like in 2008, Canada did not like they had a tiny little bump, and then they went straight back up again. The United States actually faced several places faced real, consequences. But here in Canada, didn't. And you were saying 25% of your income, okay? So that's how it's calculated the CPI here in Canada. 20, I think it's 26% now. The CPI here in Manitoba, it's 36% what people spend. Like where my province, where I am at, so it's not terrible, but it's high. Then you go to the two big cities, Vancouver and Toronto, it's 75 to 80%. Okay, that's not sustainable, right?
Right.
So it has to come down, but people will not willingly, like you hear the debates in the parliament right now, like, oh, we gotta, we gotta build more homes, we gotta build more homes. Like, okay, so you're trying to build more homes, but there's still supply coming online. Like, it's a fail. Like in Germany, and George Gammon was covering this. You have a mass supply. Everybody's blaming immigration and a mass supply of people coming in. The problem is like a lot of immigrants that come in. I know a lot of them. They live in houses together and rent it. They don't buy new homes until probably like 5, 10 years down the road when they can actually afford them. And so when you have high interest rates, people can't suddenly they can't afford basically to pay the new term. Here in Canada, for example, we got 5 year up to 5 year terms max. Okay, we don't have those 30-year terms. And so here, like actually 24 and 25, the 2 years now, we're going to see 40% of all Canadian mortgages are renewing into rates that are about two, some almost close to three times higher. And that for people, for an economy that has people live in, I think it's like 55 to almost 60% living paycheck to paycheck. How you do that? It's not going to be sustainable, right? And even if you have the 30-year term mortgages like you have in the United States, if you have to relocate or sell it somewhere, how are you going to afford a new rate, right? So it's
Well, that's
granted,
why so many
yeah,
people in the States aren't selling. It's been part
yeah,
of the problem. The real estate community here complains there's not enough inventory because people aren't moving. So
yeah,
really it's velocity that's slowed down. People are not moving around. And then the other thing that we just did, and we haven't done it, but it's being proposed, is to create more affordable housing subsidies.
yeah,
And the basic concept in economics is supply and demand. And it's just so funny to watch these politicians who either are ignorant or are feigning ignorance so they can buy votes. I don't know which is true. It doesn't matter. At the end of the
yeah,
day, if you go into an asset where there's a limited supply because the high interest rates are making it very difficult for builders to add to the supply problem, and then you subsidize the buy side in the goal of making it more affordable, how in the world is increasing purchasing power on the demand side in the face
yeah.
of limited supply make anything more affordable? It makes it more expensive.
Actually, the UK has done that for years now, and their real estate market has collapsed. So like there you go. Like it's not no, it's not gonna happen. Sorry,
Yeah.
government.
So this is a problem when you have politicians and non-business people and trying to make these business decisions, and they don't either don't understand or they have a different agenda. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like if you're a politician, you should be able to hire people who can give you good economic advice and guidance. It's not that hard to come by. So I tend to question their motives because they continually do things that are harmful to Main Street. I think there's a different game afoot. But it's funny because I keep a tinfoil hat right here by my desk. So when I start to go down that path of
Yeah, here we
questioning
go.
the motives,
Okay, I think we're getting to that point soon. So keep
I
it
put
on.
I put the tinfoil hat on so everybody knows. Okay, guys, incoming conspiracy theory. But I just the old adage that that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, our founding fathers understood that with the balance of power and all branches being co-equal and
Yeah,
unalienable rights protected by the Constitution. So even if you were a minority of one, you still had certain rights that no one could take away from you. Now we see those things being trampled all the time in the real world, but the spirit of the design was brilliant. And I think, at least for the United States and really for the rest of the world, if we could just get back to the essence of what true sovereignty and freedom is based on,
yeah,
which is private property rights and the ability to be able to speak your mind and share ideas and enlighten people, and then to own your property and enjoy your wealth, and that incentivizes you to become productive, and then everybody benefits. Because you go back to the Plymouth Rock experiment, if you're not familiar with it, but when they landed here in Jamestown way back, pre-constitution, pre anything, the Pilgrims set up a commune. And what William Bradford found out is that everybody didn't work because everybody thought someone else did. It was kind of everybody work and everybody chip in and we'll all take care of each other. Well, nobody took care of anything because everybody's expecting the other guy to take care of them. So after everybody's starving, he holds a meeting and goes, "Hey guys, new plan. There's a plot of land over to you. John, that's your land. You feed your family, figure it out." And everybody did that. Well, guess what? Then everybody got up every day and went to work, and they produced not only enough to feed their own family, but they produced more than they needed. Now they created abundance, because capitalism, working in your enlightened self-interest, creates abundance. And then when that abundance was available, then they could trade with each other. They could provide for the legitimate needs of people who were unable to, for whatever reason, work. And then what happens in an environment like that, when a country or community gets productive, is a bunch of people come in, and the list of people who are deserving of handouts gets longer and longer and longer, until
yeah,
pretty soon you tip the scales, either overtly by taxing and taking the money from the producers and giving it to the non-producers, or surreptitiously through inflation, by as we talked about earlier, by continuing to expand the number of claims on productivity in the system, so that the wealth of the productive becomes diluted and nobody can quite figure it out, but everybody knows it's happening. And then one day the productive people, as Ayn Rand wrote in Atlas Shrugged, wake up and go, "Why the hell am I working so hard just to tread water?" It just seems like every day the regulations and the taxes and it just makes it so difficult. I think I'm going to retire, and I'm just going to take what's mine and let the rest of the world figure out. And when you start disincentivizing productivity in any society, big or small, then you're going to have an unproductive society. And what happens is you rely upon financialization to steal the remaining productivity until everybody wakes up. And then one day the system collapses. And like I said from the top, and I think you said it too, it's been going on for quite a while. And even though the United States, and the system that our founders gave us, unleashed the greatest capitalistic force in the history of humanity, at some point, no matter how strong you are, cancer will kill you if you don't deal with it.
oh
And I
yeah,
just think the
yeah,
United States and the world is at that point where there's going to be a reckoning. And it doesn't have to be the end of the world for anybody, but it can be the change of a system.
yeah,
And for you or me or anybody who doesn't pay attention to what's going on and get in a position to weather that storm, you could end up on the wrong end of it. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. There always are in every reset. I think now is the time to be really doubling down on your education and preparation.
yeah.
And if nothing bad happens, if somehow the wizards figure it out and they pull the right levers and they bring us in for a soft landing, and somehow they find a way to kick the can down the road, and there's some magic formula that anybody with common sense can't figure out to stop this death spiral, great. It's not going to hurt you to have been prepared. But if in fact this thing falls apart and unravels and exponentially, the way exponentiality works is the last move is the biggest.
Yeah.
It's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and it doesn't look like it looks like you're far away, right? The old stadium with the magic dropper. If it's doubling, if every time you take a drop of water and drop it into a stadium, the first however many hundreds of drops don't really matter, but that last drop is going to take it from half full to overflowing.
Yeah.
And when you see charts hockey sticking, like you do with debt service and debt, and the every time, at least in the United States, we got to borrow $1.30 to get $1 of growth, right? And you step on the gas harder with a flawed model, all you do is accelerate your demise. So the key is to step outside that system, not be dependent upon the currency, not being dependent upon the banking system, making sure that your investments are things that you either own, control directly, limiting your exposure to counterparty risk, and having a lot of recourse
Yeah.
against defaults, whether it's a renter stops paying or a borrower stops paying, whatever you've invested in for your productivity, making sure that you have recourse against the assets and can unleash their productivity, even though the counterparty is now gone broke. Then I think you have a fighting chance.
Yeah, no, it's definitely common. Like I see this in Norway. Norway is such a great example of like it's what let's do the Norway versus Argentina right now, okay? So Argentina, they gone through almost 100 years. I wrote about it in a book in 2015 about all the different trials and tribulations that Argentinian economy has gone through with, hyperinflation and then resets like bank holidays and devaluations overnight. And so it's happened many times there, and they've been spending. The government is insanely massive, and so people starting to get fed up there. And they had enough of it basically. So what ended up happening in the last election, the 20 and 30-year-olds mostly actually were desperate, that we see no future. And so what ended up happening, a lot of them voted for a crazy anarcho-capitalist called Javier Milei. And what's funny about that is he's really great. He's great at entertaining people and getting them going, right, with ripping off government agencies and so on to get rid of them. But actually, he's done since he got in January. A lot of people are harping on him. He's done much, and is going to the World Economic Forum, and the things about what he's done already, he's actually cut the agencies, I think, down to 8 agencies from 16 or 20, I think it was. So he's drastically, and he kicked out 5,000 government employees so far. And so he's trying to do what he can do with his like dictatorial power, basically, that he has. And now he's trying to pass a bill that he had to, because he doesn't have enough power in Congress. He had to dilute his bill a bit, but it's starting to pass again into like an omnibus bill where it's just going to be mass, privatization of all these big like state-owned enterprises everywhere and so on. Because in Argentina, it's come to a point where 6 out of 10 lives, in the poverty zone, and then you
Mm.
had basically the other 4 out of 10, they're government employees, and it's not sustainable. Like I've seen this happening in so many countries, like all the pigs countries, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. They all had governments that were over 50% of the economy. The economy just strangled and died. Right. So that's what you saw in the European crisis in 2011 up to 2013, that ended with the Cypriot bailout, for example. So when a government gets too big, it just completely like sucks all the energy out of the economy, right? Because you have the productive part that are trying to be productive, the private economy over here, trying to then pay taxes for the employees. Here in Manitoba, there's a lot of government employees, and I have constant conversations with them. It's like, I pay taxes. They're saying to me, I was like, are you? Are you really pay taxes? Do you understand where your money comes from?
Recycling
It comes
taxes.
from
Yeah.
the poor private people trying to do something productive, and then they give you that money as your income. It's actually tax money, and then you think you pay taxes, but you got money from the private sector and basically taking it out. And so it's that. So what has ended up happening in Argentina is that they just had enough. Now in Norway, they're kind of getting to that point slowly. I think there might be another 10 years, but when my mom got her the in Norway, it's interesting because you have a huge amount of your money goes to taxes. I would say probably 80 to 90%. It's pretty wild. With like way more than Canada is bad, but Norway is on another level. And so people don't even have enough to save up for, private savings even. Most people don't even have that. So they only rely on the government pension that they'll get at one point, right? And then they have their houses that they think that is, very valuable because they've gone up. Because what ends up happening in Norway is that when you tax people, you steal their wealth. And so what ends up happening is they get poorer and poorer and poorer. Well, how do you try to get richer again? Like how do you try to stay on that level, that you feel like you're in in a decent amount of living standard, like your living standard is staying equal while they keep on adding debt, right? Like to keep themselves afloat. And so in Norway, they've gotten to a point now where they have so much debt. There's nobody that are able to get into any more debt. Like they give out mortgages to 60-year-olds like it's second to none in Norway. For homes that are, my mom been telling me like, $2-3 million, right? And then you have my mom just retired. Well, she retired as a woman going from middle class. Actually, she was a cleaning lady paying 51% income tax. And then she goes to getting government pension because she hadn't much saved up of basically being below the poverty line. Luckily, she has a husband that runs a hairdressing business, so she can keep herself afloat. But if it wasn't for that, my mom would have lived in poverty because she basically followed the government and did what the government said all throughout time, and then suddenly she's sitting there, with basically nothing because she didn't take care of herself, and she almost didn't have money to take care of herself because the government took all that money from her in order instead of her saving, let's say, 40% of her income into something productive. The government stole it and used it on just pushing papers around. Basically, it's very sad. But I think Norway is probably another decade or so away from that Venezuela moment. But people are getting really, they really feel it now. Like the poverty is creeping in quite heavily. Like where the middle class is just getting, pushed hard to the one side. So very scary stuff that's happening with, and it's happening in a lot of those heavy government countries. Like look at France, for example. The constant riots there. All of Southern Europe is just really in shambles. But the big ones are the heaviest tax countries I found. Has the most private debt levels because people are trying to keep their living standards while the government keeps on stealing their money.
Yeah, well, like I said, debt is a cancer. And if
Yeah,
I can buy a few strategic stocks or I can pump some credit and create some comparables in the real estate market and make you think by a comparative sampling that your stocks and your real estate are worth a lot, then you look at that and do an asset minus liabilities equal net worth. And you go, wow, I'm pretty rich. Even though my cash flow is a little tight, that's okay because I can borrow against my assets to subsidize, and you basically consume that wealth and then leave a big hole at the end. So again, I go back to the notion that investing, as boring as it is, in real production and being prepared to weather storms, no matter what the asset values are, is a much better way to go. There's so many people buying stocks today that don't even know what a PE ratio is, much less what a good one is. They wouldn't know how to convert earnings into a cap rate to figure out what my yield on investment is. They're just hoping to buy low, sell high, and they're
yeah,
looking for news and they're trying to buy the trend. If they study a guy like Warren Buffett, they're going to realize this is a guy that studies companies and their positioning and their productivity, their earnings, and he invests in companies based on fundamentals. That's why, by and large, he's had good success. You can do the same thing. You just have to invest in things that you understand, right? I
yeah.
wish I would have
Key
done
point.
that way back in the day. I do want to help folks who just heard you go through that description of why government job growth is actually bad.
Yeah,
And we just had a bunch of that in the United States, and people might be celebrating our robust jobs report. But when you're creating government jobs, if you're a business person or if you work for a company, think of it this way: there's three basic departments in any company. There's the group that sells something and brings the revenue in. There's the group that ships orders or provides services that gives the salespeople something to sell and customers coming back. And then there's the people who count the money and run the computers and file the things and take care of the facilities, right?
yeah,
That's the support function. You have to have it. However, If you're looking at a company and it becomes very, very heavy in finance and administration, got a big accounting department, a big legal department, it's got a big filing department, it's got a big tech department. Those people do not produce any revenue for the company. They do not provide any goods and services directly to the customers. They exist for one reason only, and that is to support the people who do. So the finance and administration department exists to support the sales function and the manufacturing of goods and services. That's it. So in the government is like finance and administration. The government is there to support and protect and keep the productive part of society, the people who go to work every day and invent things and build things and sell things and provide goods and services, their freedom and safety so that they can do those activities. And when a society is focused on being productive, this is the theme of this whole show, then you're going to have a healthy productivity, as long as the financial system is cancerous and stealing that productivity. And so, not that anybody is calling up Russel Gray and saying, "Hey, Russ, how do you think we should organize the world?" But, if somebody made me God for a day and I would just say, "Hey, what we need to do is we need to get a financial system that doesn't steal from the productive and disincentivize productivity. And then we need to make sure that our investments from the productivity we make is reinvested in more productivity and not the distribution of the productivity in the name of equality," right? And so I understand the desire to be benevolent with your wealth. But when it gets to the point where you're giving away your last dime, it's no different than, giving away your last meal. I mean, at some point when you're flying around, you're told if the cabin loses pressure, you put your oxygen mask on first. You got to take care of yourself first, and then you can help other people. When you get to the point where you are the one in need, you got to call it for what it is. And so we have a country in the United States that isn't as rich as it once was. And at one point we had the ability to be generous. Were overly generous, and combine that with a system that was created by people who were playing on the heartstrings of the generous people. And we've given away our productivity in multiple ways. And now we're in a situation where we need to correct that, or this can't go on. And so, to me, that's where we're at. Again, top of the show, why I'm here, why I do what I do. I got woken up to a degree. I'm still learning every day. I learn from people like you. And that's why I encourage anyone, no matter how big your audience is, if you got something to say, if you feel like you figured it out, you have a way of saying it that can help other people understand, and you wake up just another human being,
Yeah, very
that's good
important.
enough. I mean, look at Robert Kiyosaki. Robert was just, he was successful, 47 years old at the time, and he'd built up $10,000 a month of passive income, which is good. And he was able to retire. Fantastic. Right. But he wasn't Warren Buffett. He wasn't Donald Trump. He was successful. But what he chose to do is to share what he had learned so that average, ordinary, everyday Main Street people could achieve the degree of success he did. He created a board game called Cash Flow to teach it. And he began to write a pamphlet to promote the book that became the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And he struck a nerve. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, this silly little book that he was out there, schlepping around in the back of his car, selling at car washes, has become a perennial bestseller and changed millions of
Yeah.
people's lives.
Worldwide, not just America.
But what if he would have never written it?
Mhm.
And so, I don't know who you are out there listening to this right now, but I'm telling you, if you're somebody that thinks you've got something to say, get in the fight, start saying it. You just never, ever know who it's going to
Yeah.
enlighten, who it's going to catalyze, where it can lead. It doesn't take that much effort. That's what I'm doing. It's what John's doing. There's lots of us out there. There's plenty of room for more. Get in the game, start sharing with people. Even if you do something as simple as taking this show, share it with a friend and say, "Hey, let's listen to these two guys talk. Does that make sense to you? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you not understand? Maybe we should research further." Use it as a forum to begin to study. Educate your friends and neighbors, because guess what, ladies and gentlemen, those people vote if you're in a quasi-democratic environment. And that means that if they vote out of economic ignorance, they may mean well, they may be very intelligent, smart people, but if they are ignorant of the way the system works and how the things they may be voting for could literally undermine the very wealth that you're trying to build or your ability to enjoy it,
Yeah, and
then
that.
It
Yeah, and
doesn't
that's
matter
happened.
how smart you are as an investor. Ask Jack Ma, right? Jack Ma,
Mhm.
one of the richest guys in the world, created Alibaba, the Amazon of China, and he doesn't live in a free society. He said something the Communist Chinese Party didn't like, and he kind of went dark for years, quite some time.
Yeah,
And when he did come out, he was a lot more muted in his
yeah,
commentary. So, when you don't have the ability to speak your mind or enjoy your wealth or even be secure that your government is going to take your wealth away from you, if in fact you say something that opposes them, you're living in a very tough system. And so I think right now we're in a place where we need to start to exert our rights to speak our mind, and we
yeah,
need to exert our rights to own private property, and we need to use our wealth and use our freedom of speech to be able to encourage other people to build their wealth and use their freedom of speech and just continue to spread kind of the anti-cancer, if you will, the vaccine, if I can use that word, uh, to
oh, yeah,
to inoculate the
yeah,
world against really what I think is a very flawed financial system right now. They're not
yeah.
going to ask us how to put it together, but we can certainly have some input about the people who are in charge of putting it together and hope they will do a better job representing us than the crowd of people we've had up to
Yeah.
this point.
Well, if there's any hope left, I just had a conversation yesterday. I was driving home from I had my regular daytime job, so I drove home for 13 hours from up north where I was working, and I had the pleasure to sit with a former Ukrainian. He's 49 years old. He actually survived the latter part and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he told me a very insightful thing about two different approaches to, when things are bad, you need to do something to reset the economy. And so there was two differences. He mentioned, difference of what Poland did versus what Ukraine has done. And Poland, he said they ripped off the band-aid and they'd be like, we're not going to have no more communism whatsoever. We're not going to have this corrupt system. And it was misery for 3 years for people. But then they really just took off and become one of the more prosperous. Actually, they're an up-and-coming nation now in Europe. They're actually taking over for Germany probably soon. And so that approach versus the Ukrainian approach, where they chose to have the remnants of the old system, and look at where they're at today. They're still one of the most corrupt places uh, in um, in Europe. So there is hope, but what really needs to be educated to people is the what we're talking about here. But then we need to educate people. Is like we just can't live in a society where we're just going to keep on, putting on little band-aids, or like as you said, just cut off those tumors. You got to go after the root cause. And
Yeah.
you gotta rip. You gotta just take it out. Do diet, whatever it is. Like a dietary change is a good example, and just completely change the outcome that you will have for the future. Because if you don't, you're gonna end up like those corrupt nations that live through. Like, look at Argentina. You want to live 100 years, like let's say 40 years more, in a system where you live in poverty with your family and your friends, or would you are you willing to take a hard hit and then well, at least you protect yourself as much as you can, and then jump in and say like let's just redo this now in a way better way, and promote good ideas, like just as simple as having a free society where free speech and private property is the paramount of civilization. You will get so far with people's happiness and everything. Everybody's talking about all this happiness and all this BS that's going out there, pseudo intellectual stuff. Real happiness comes from true freedom, and you can only achieve true freedom through real free market economics. And how you can have that is very, very limited government, and if any. So,
Yeah. I think a
yeah,
lot of people think that they want to be wealthy so they can be free, but really, freedom precedes wealth. If you look at Kiyosaki's cash flow game, you don't really get wealthy until you get free from your job. So once you're free from your job, you have the ability to focus on your investing. You get wealthier faster. Our founding fathers didn't give us wealth in the United States; they gave us freedom, and we used that freedom to become wealthy. When I lost all my wealth, what I had and retained was my freedom, and I used my freedom to begin the process of rebuilding. And I was able to stay free, as you continue to work. So sometimes don't do the two-step. Don't mistake that freedom is on the back end of wealth. Wealth is on the back end of freedom. And if you're fortunate enough to have built some wealth, then I encourage you to use the time and the resources that you've got available to you now and freed up to invest in the process of promoting and protecting the very freedom that makes your wealth possible. So that's kind of my mission, fourth quarter of my life here. I want to leave the world better for my kids and grandkids and everybody out there. And I'm trying to teach the things to people that I've learned over life that I wish I would have somebody talking to me when I was 20, 25 years old, first starting out, would have saved me a lot of pain. I can't go back and relive my life. I got some things right. I got a lot of things wrong, but I learned a ton.
Yeah,
And so my mission is to share that as best I can. If anybody wants to follow me, it's easy to send an email to follow at russelgray.com, Russell gray.com. Don't have the website up yet. I will. Uh, but um, but yeah, I'm just going to, continue to put my ideas out there, John, just like you are, and
yeah,
introduce people to people I've gotten a chance to know and ideas they're sharing, and introduce people to be a part of clubs and organizations and events that I'm at and believe in. So that's where I met you. And there's a lot of cool people out there that are getting engaged. So if you've been out there kind of watching from the sidelines, in the virtual world, get out in the real world, meet some people,
it's a
meet
lot
and
of fun.
mingle, get involved in your community, share ideas, ask questions. And I think, as long as we do that, if we just all start to open up and really start to work on it, we're going to be fine. There's more of us than there are the people who are trying to control all of us.
Yeah.
And as long as we have our freedom of speech and our right to accumulate wealth, and we do it wisely, we should be able to survive whatever these guys put us through. And ultimately, I hope, get people in charge and a system in charge that'll be much better and much more productive for humanity as a whole. That's the mission. And I encourage you to be a part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Speak your mind, everyone. Don't be afraid. I think that's the mission. So, yeah, pleasure having you on, Russ. And I really truly appreciate all your great insights. So, we'll probably have you on at one point in the future here. But please check out everything. Like, I'm gonna share all the links to everything that Russ does below. So, make sure you take Russ's advice and prepare yourself with things, because we talked about a lot of it here. But Russ has some fantastic insights to combine your wealth and diversify your wealth in real true ways that could really put forward a legacy for you and your family in the future. So thanks again for coming on, Russ, and looking forward to talk to you again.
Thanks, John.